Welcome, everybody. My name is Alex Pardo, and I come to you with just a lot of excitement and appreciation for the opportunity that's been given to me to participate in this Front Row Dads member podcast takeover series. I have the pleasure of interviewing just a very dear friend of mine, Mike Wagner, who I'm going to introduce you to here in just a few minutes. But to give you guys a little bit of background and context, so this podcast has nothing to do with me. But just so you know who you are listening to, again, my name's Alex Pardo. I have been married to my beautiful wife, Natalie, for a decade. We got two incredible, healthy girls, Ariana, who is 9 years old, and Alessia, who is 7 years old. Born and raised in Miami, Florida. Parents are Cuban, so if you happen to catch a little bit of the accent, that is where I am coming to you from. And with that being said, guys, I have been introduced and now have been a member of Front Row Dads for about a year and a half. I joined March of 2023, and it's incredible what happens when you immerse yourself around the right people, especially men who are intentional fathers, husbands, are looking to show up as the best versions of themselves on a daily basis. And the ripple effects of that community in such a short amount of time have been profound in my life. And I owe that to my good friend, Mike Wagner, who, again, I'm going to introduce you to in a second. Mike and I have been dear friends for a number of years. He's had such an incredible impact on my life as a man, as a father, has also had a big impact on me business-wise. And somebody who I'm super grateful to say has always been in my foxhole, so to speak, and vice versa. We have conversations on a monthly basis, and the conversations extend far beyond business. They extend to personal. He and I do a lot of inner work, and we share our experiences, and we aim to continue to sharpen each other. And so when I was asked by the Front Row Dads community if I wanted to participate in this podcast takeover, they asked me, who would you want to interview? And literally the first person that came to mind was Mike Wagner. And throughout the show, I think you're going to quickly see why. So with that being said, Mike has been together with Melanie, his beautiful wife, for 25 years. They've been married for 16, and they have 4 beautiful kids, William, who is 10, Lucy, who is 8, Emma, who is 4, and baby Jack, who they just welcomed into the world about 7 months ago. So just incredible family. Just if you don't follow them on Facebook, definitely follow them on Facebook. Mike travels a lot in his RV camper and has just been very thoughtful and intentional about designing the kind of life that he wants to live. Not a life that is chasing things per se, but more experiences. And on today's podcast, guys, we are going to talk about a lot of things that I think can have a very meaningful and profound impact on your life. So my invitation to you, open your minds, open your hearts. And with that being said, Mike, my man, thank you for joining me here on a Front Row Dads podcast.
Dude, Alex, I am so excited to be here, man. You know I love all things Front Row Dads and all things Alex Pardo, so I don't know how it gets any better than this, my man. I'm excited.
Well, thank you, man. So am I. So, as I was thinking about this, I mean, and you know this, brother, but I've been hosting the Flip Empire podcast show for 8 years now, and I've never been asked to host somebody else's podcast. So I almost had to really just reset and think, okay, how can I deliver the most amount of value by asking questions that can really resonate with the incredible men and even women that listen to this podcast? You spoke so highly about Front Row Dads when you first told me about it, when you and I were in Guatemala a number of years ago doing some mission work, and I see now why. So with that being said, I think a good question as a jump off point is, what does being a front row dad mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I could answer a lot of different ways. For me, I think it is putting first things first, right? And I found Front Row Dads, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe around that, 4 or 5 years ago when, ironically, one of my students in my organization said, "Hey, dude, you should check out this podcast." I say ironically because he was not a dad and not married at the time. So he was a bachelor turning me on to the Front Row Dads, which I thought was cool. But he said, "Dude, it's right up your alley." And sure enough, I listened to a podcast. And this was back in the day where I could just jump on. When I went to the website, got a phone number, jumped on the phone, and I said, "All right, Vroman, how do I get into this organization?" And it might have been the easiest sales call he's ever had in the history of the organization because it just aligned with everything that I believe in. And I think the Front Row Dads tagline, right? Family men with businesses, not businessmen with family. It resonates very deeply with me now. back when I joined, I wanted it to resonate with me.
Yeah.
I had been a member of a business slash life mastermind for many years before that, and it was hugely beneficial. But it wasn't family centric,
Mm.
and my family was growing, and I needed to align the way I spent my time and my money and my energy as far as personal growth goes. I wanted that to be in alignment with my family life, and Front Row Dads ended up being the perfect place to create that alignment.
Yeah, I love that, man. So, before we started recording this podcast, you and I were kind of talking through what's the direction. You and I have had so many conversations, and we can go in a million different directions. So, I want to start with parenting. There's a pretty high probability, I would think, that everybody listening to this is a parent or would like to be a parent if they're not already one and have children. So, with that being said, Mike, I want to kind of frame the conversation around a couple different areas. I want to talk about quality time, right, with our children and with our family. I want to talk about what it means to be a role model, and then I want to talk about challenges, because you and I know that life isn't just everything is always on the up. It's not about peaches and rainbows and unicorns. Like, man, life can be challenging at times, and we can have some serious setbacks. And you and I are not immune to that. Just like whoever's listening to this has experienced some type of adversity in their life, and parenting is no different. These kids don't come with manuals, and I have learned so much over the 9 years I've been a father. And there's the one thing I know for sure is that I know significantly less than what I need to learn, right? Like, there's so much that I don't know about being a parent. And I think that's why you and I have been just have sought out a community like Front Row Dads, so that we can sharpen each other. So with that being said, I'm eager to be kind of a student along with the audience here. But when we talk about quality time, brother, like, how do you ensure that you're carving out meaningful time with your wife, Melanie, with your 4 children, despite the demands of your business and everything else that life is kind of tugging at you for?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my answer may be a little unique in that I'm fortunate to be in a place where our business it doesn't creep in. Let me say it this way: I have an opportunity for a lot of quantity time with my wife and children. We travel 4 or 5 months out of the year, and we've set out intentionally to create a life where um, that's different from what it used to be, because I used to escape into my work
Mm,
as a way to soothe myself around the idea that I didn't always know how to be a good dad, right? And or even a good husband for that matter. And so it was easy to default into provider mode, right? Society will tell us that if we're providing for our family, that's first and foremost. And I don't disagree that that's a very important thing. I just have a very broad view of what it means to provide these days, largely because of Front Row Dads. It's no longer just making sure the bills are paid and that we have nice things or nice experiences or that sort of thing. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of that. But if that's the limit to what I provide for my family, I think I'm leaving a whole lot of blank spaces
agreed.
that are better being filled. And so, for me, when it comes to quality time, the my metric that I use is presence, whether or not I'm present. And it's funny, I kind of smile as I say that, because I will confess that 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't even know what presence was. It's not like I knew what it was, but I couldn't figure out how to get there. Like, I couldn't even point to it on a map. Like,
Mm,
the
I get
very
it.
idea confused me. I'm like, I don't understand what people mean when they're like, be present. It's like, I was always either thinking about the past. Did I do this right? Did I do that? Could I have done that better? Or I was looking ahead to the future of, man, life will be so much better when I get there, when I get to this or that, whatever it might be. And it's only because of my joining Front Row Dads, the many guides that I was introduced to within the organization, who I could model and kind of take what works for me and understand that we're all different, and what works for somebody isn't necessarily the prescription that's going to work for me. But I assimilated all of the resources and the relationships within Front Row Dads. And one of the results that I've created out of that kind of recipe was a newfound ability to be present. And that's what I try to bring to my family as often as I'm able. Clearly, I'm human, I'm imperfect, and so there are times where I'm throwing the baseball and not there in the present moment. But compared to the old Mike, I spend much more time present with my children and my wife, and that's one of the greatest blessings I've taken out of my participation in Front Row Dads.
Yeah, no, I totally hear where you're coming from, brother. And by the way, I fail in that department on what sometimes feels like a daily basis. I think now what I have now more than ever is just an awareness about it and an opportunity to just reset. Right. So along those lines, brother, just a quick follow-up is for what would be some practical advice for those listening that struggle with being present? Maybe they find themselves in the same shoes you were in 4 or 5 years ago, where it's like, dude, what does that even mean? Right? Is there anything, do you think it involves going on this journey of inner work to get to a place where you can experience presence at a moment's notice? Or is it a mindset? Is it a light switch? Is it awareness that then you can just, okay, no, I'm going to like forget the past. I'm going to put aside any worries, concerns, challenges, whatever might be like vying for my attention, and I'm just going to like choose to be present. Which one is it? Or maybe it's a hybrid. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'm real big on avoiding either ors these days, and I
Mm,
think it's a yes to both of those. I think there is a switch. How heavy that switch is will depend maybe on how much inner work we've done, how frequently we need to go back and flip the switch to the other side.
yeah, man.
Might also be dependent on the amount of deep inner work we've done. But I think and there are some people that might just have this ability, which is great. For me, that wasn't the case. I had to do a lot of the deep work, but long before I did any of the deep work to figure out how to calm my nervous system and get to a point where I wasn't running around in fight or flight or freeze like nonstop. The short version of the story is my sympathetic nervous system got turned on a long time ago and I didn't know it. And it stayed on for three
Mhm.
plus decades. And that was what kept me out of the present moment. I was always looking for threats to um, securitize myself, to make myself feel safe.
Yeah,
And as my family grew, the number of threats and the stakes of me finding my security and creating safety got higher, and so the sympathetic response kind of amped up, and I went the wrong direction for a little bit.
yeah,
But all of that to say, that doesn't mean this has to be some elephant that intimidates the crap out of us, right? Like, how are we going to eat an elephant one bite at a time? And so, if you said, Mike, give me one like practical way that somebody can start to find presence, experience it, even if in just little micro doses, um, it would be to, well, let me just quickly tell a story and say that, I was running on high as far as brain activity goes, hard charging, type A, OCD, high achieving, all of that stuff that I think a lot of the Front Row Dad audience can probably resonate with. I was running on that all of the time. The fuel was fear, as I alluded to. And when I realized I wanted to make a change, I did what a lot of folks do. And it's like meditation. That's got to
mm,
be the key. It's going to be the thing that saves me. And meditation is great. And I love it. It's a part of my daily practice. But what I now recognize is that's like a big ask. That's asking somebody to go from 100 miles an hour to zero without traversing all of the speeds between.
I get it.
And so what's worked well for me is something I called embodiment, right? Where I just tune into my body, whether it's my my motion, like motor, right? Like this, uh, playing basketball, playing golf, any sport that people have played. If they think of an athletic flow state, that's kind of what I'm referring to here. So moving your body, and everything else falls away when we're shooting a jump shot
Mm,
or whatever, swinging the golf club. That's one way to do it. The other is through the sensory system. So I enjoy just sitting out on my back deck in the early morning, looking up at the sun, eyes closed, and feeling the warmth on my face. And as relaxing as that can be, I know a lot of front row dads go, dude, I can't sit still. That would be terrible. Well, that's the practice. Just taking 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to start to do it. Because what happens is, the way I describe it is that embodiment practice, whether it's the motor system or the sensory system, when we tune into it and activate it, we're actually midway between that high level, hard charging OCD, can't turn my brain off. and the lower theta and delta states of meditation, we're in what's known as the sensory motor rhythm, which can be a bridge between our highly activated states and our very calm, almost like we ate Valium states, right? And so I've used that as a way to create, I'm not going to say mastery, but some level of competence around reclaiming control of my nervous system, which used to be beyond my control, and then essentially creating the state that's going to serve me best, depending on whatever the circumstances around me might be.
I love that, man. In front row dads, you know, it's often heard, at least I often hear the 3 R's, which I love. And you knowing me will know why I'm gonna love the first one in particular. But relationships, right? The second R is resources, and the third R is results. You go and you plug in, you build the relationships, you have access to resources, and then doing the work, you'll get the results most likely that you're looking for. Are there any resources around this particular area for men and women listening to the show, watching it maybe, that want to just be more, practice more presence, right? And as an aside, before I let you answer that question, I would even go as far as say the person listening to this that might struggle and push back on, hey, sitting 3 to 5 minutes is too hard. That's probably an indication that you need to go that much deeper into this work, right? I remember when I learned transcendental meditation, like it was a gift because it happened right before COVID, like literally January 2020. I went to to some office here in Miami, and for 4 days I learned the practice of transcendental meditation. Man, sitting for that first 20 minutes, it could have felt like 20 hours. It was so difficult. Now I could do it literally at any point with a bunch of chaos around me. I can close my eyes and get into that state. Now, that didn't happen, immediately. To your point, it took time and practice. So are there any resources, whether it be books or YouTube channels, just anything that people might be able to plug into?
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple books. One is 10% Happier, and that's a quick, easy read. That might help somebody who goes, I'm kind of interested in this meditation thing, but I'm also way more of a skeptic, and I'm not even sure it's for me. This is a great book that would give you an introduction to what it is and what it's not, kind of break through some of the myths. And really, for me, it was a great place to start. For somebody that might want a little more of the science behind it to convince themselves, because maybe they're highly analytical in some way, and they just can't get on with all this woo stuff, right?
Yeah.
The book is The Body Keeps the Score. It's about the intersection of mindfulness and neuroscience, and it talks a lot about kind of the sympathetic nervous system that I just alluded to. So both of those books are great. And then if somebody says, well, Mike, I don't want to read, I just want to get down to the brass tacks and try it, there's lots of apps out there. I use Insight Timer.
Okay.
It's a free app, and it's just guided meditations. You can pick one that's 10 to 15 minutes and just close your eyes and listen. The last piece of advice I'll give about presencing and meditation that I found hugely beneficial for the longest time, my meditation, I thought what I was trying to do was relax. I was trying to calm myself, and that can be part of it. But what I was doing was trying to like manipulate myself, and I was rejecting the part of me that was all fired up.
Yeah.
And so and I always used to say, somebody who says I could clear my mind has never been in between my 2 ears, because that just ain't gonna happen, right? Yeah. I'm happy to report that now I don't believe that to be true anymore. But the thing that was most helpful for me was the reframe. Rather than meditation being something where you're supposed to relax and calm down, now my goal with meditation is just to feel whatever is. Maybe that's that I'm tense. Maybe that's that my brain is highly active. That's okay. I just enter into the meditation to notice without judgment what it is that I'm experiencing, whether those are thoughts or feelings, etc. And in doing so, I'm finding that the benefits just kind of flow, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I love it. And the only other quick addition that I'll throw in is not to judge your thoughts. It's totally normal and common, and from what I've learned and in my experience, to meditate and to your thoughts to go elsewhere, and to not judge that, but just go back to whether it's a mantra or go back to a particular state or a thought, whatever it might be. So don't ever judge that. Mike, I want to kind of transition here, dude. Before Natalie and I got married, we would go on date nights and we would look around the restaurant. More than half of the people at tables would be on their phones. And in many cases, children's would be on an iPad or whatever you call it these days. Right. And I remember specifically Natalie and I would kind of like judge them, like internal, right? Like, oh, like when we have kids, like that's never going to be us. And fast forward now, my daughters are 7 and 9. And like when her and I want to just like connect and have a conversation, and it's not like a date night and they're part of us, as much as I try to get them wrapped up into certain conversation and we try to have fun with it and like, hey, like the hypothetical type questions to draw out their creativity and bring them into a conversation, man, sometimes we default to just giving them the device and admittedly, for an hour, letting that be the parent, right? So that her and I can have a conversation and connect. And how stupid was I to judge those people, right? Because clearly I have some things to figure out. So as it relates to our children, and granted, the answer to your question might vary depending on our kids' ages, right? Whether they're teenagers or you got young ones. But overall, how do you and Melanie think about the role that social media, screens, all that tech plays a role into our kids' lives? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you and I would agree that tech isn't going anywhere. Right. And so there's a part of me that feels, hey, it's important that they understand how to use tech, but to make sure tech isn't using them. Mm-hmm. And what's the messaging that they're getting? Like it's tough because my wife and I don't have the time to watch every single show they watch, but I know there's resources out there that we can figure out what a show is about and what the messaging is. So let me get to my question. How do you and Melanie think about social tech and what role it plays in your children's life? What are some of the boundaries maybe that you guys have put around it? And then what do you suggest for parents out there that haven't really figured this part out yet?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have more questions than answers around it. But
as do I.
But I can certainly share, like, and here's how Melanie and I think about it, and myself in particular. I have a specific kind of outlook because of my history with tech use as well as other addictions, of which I think tech is a very real vulnerability for all of us. And you mentioned, and I think a very important place to start for this conversation is whether or not we're using the technology or the technology is using us. I think that's very important. I know JV had on a guest, I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but who spoke in a very articulate way about screen usage.
Yes.
So check out that old episode. But for me, there's a level beyond, am I using it or is it using me? I think I've gotten to a place personally where tech doesn't use me too much. I use it. And I will also say that I often use it in an unhealthy way. Okay. I was actually just at a one of the adventure series retreats with 15 other FRDs up in the mountains of Colorado. Just literally got home last week. And what I recognize is that I use technology. That's better than it using me, but I use it as a giant digital pacifier.
I've never quite heard it put that way, dude. I might steal that one. Digital pacifier.
And it's not healthy, right? I use it to distract myself. I use it to numb myself. And that's not a good thing to model for my children. That would be right. Like I have a history with substance abuse, so alcohol and drugs. Like if I were still doing those things, I sure as heck wouldn't do them in front of my kids. Right now, I'm happy to report that I've worked through and healed enough where I no longer need those to numb myself from the experience that I find myself in. But I've in many ways replaced the alcohol. I replaced it with an exercise addiction for a while. And then I worked through that. And now technology is my vice. So I put safeguards in place for myself that allow me to not model that for my children, and also to be honest with them about the fact that daddy knows he has challenges with this device, and I don't want to see them suffer through the same thing. Now, the flip side to this coin, where I don't have answers yet, is, I don't want my kids to be the 18-year-old who shows up at college never having a drink in their life, because I witnessed what happened to those kids.
They go crazy.
Right. When they were helicopter parented through high school, and then they go off and they get free reign in college, like things didn't really go well. And I don't want that experience for my kids relative to technology either. So the way that we're approaching it is to try to remember that these things, exercise, technology, even the occasional drink, right? And that one might be debatable, but I'm not here to preach anything. It's not the thing itself that's unhealthy. There are plenty of people that can have a beer and it's not an issue. I just happen to not be one of those people, right? And so what I encourage people to remember is that it's not the thing that's healthy or unhealthy. It's not the thing that's good or bad. It's our relationship to the thing. And we really have to get honest with ourselves. Is my relationship to this thing healthy? And what I've figured out for our family, at least, is that if my relationship is healthy to something, the chances that my children and wife's relationship to that same thing is also going to be healthy are very good. If I have an unhealthy relationship with something, it's likely that through modeling, they will inherit some of that unhealthy aspect. And so it's not true across the board, but I think it's been a good vector for our family to follow. And so I guess what I'm saying there is to walk what we talk is probably the best way to help our kids navigate the challenges of finding the healthy amount of screen time and technology, et cetera. Also understanding that our brains as adults are different than their brains as children. And so, I think we need to keep our eye on that too.
Yeah. And I think we also need to keep our eye on, like, one of the things that I've come to believe is that our children can sometimes be our best teachers if we allow them to, if we listen to the things they say, and whether we realize it or not. And I know many listening to this show, watching this show, probably do realize it, but it's worth mentioning. Our children are always watching us. Even when we don't think they're watching and listening, they are, because sometimes it's just happened over the weekend out of left field. They'll bring up something that happened months ago, and it's like, whoa, right? Like it freezes you. Now it has made me as a father hyper aware that it's not just the things I say, it's not just the things I do, but it's also the things I don't say and the things I don't do that resonate and ring loud in their little heads. And initially when I came to that realization, Mike, dude, I was almost paranoid. It's like it almost felt like walking on eggshells as a father, like making sure that I don't screw up my children so that they're sitting in some therapist office in 10 years. And I now have realized that in some way, shape, or form, like, I think most parents are going to damage their kids. The question is to what extent, and what are we doing to make sure that we're modeling the kind of behaviors that we want, the kind of values that we want, and having conversation around those things, I think, can be very, very healthy. By the way, this is an experience share, not from a place of I have figured this out, because I have not. So I just want to put myself out there, but just the things I think I'm starting to like believe, and just the conclusions I'm starting to come to. And who knows, man, maybe in a year I'm feeling different, but for now, I just kind of wanted to reflect some of the things that I think are bouncing around in my head. So, man, one last question before we move on, because I want to talk about marriage, right? And like the role that plays, not just with our spouse, obviously, but with our children, just the whole family dynamic. We don't have to get into a deep, long conversation about this, but what would you say has been your biggest challenge as a father, and what have you done to overcome it, or what are you doing to try to overcome it?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard one not to go deep on, because this is what brought me to Front Row Dads was a challenge with my temper. I had anger deep inside of me that I wasn't even aware of, and it started leaking out. And I was like, "Whoa, who's the crazy dad in this house?" Like, and it was me, right? Like, how did that just happen? And it all came to a head as my son approached the age that I was 7. When a whole bunch of bad things in my life started happening, right? There was my father passed away, and that created a lot of chaos in our house and some unsafe situations. And, kind of the snowball rolled. And as a 7-year-old kid, I didn't really know how to handle it. And so, ironically enough, or not coincidentally, as my son approached that same age, some of the challenges that I had been doing well to white knuckle, the suffering and struggling that I was experiencing inside of myself, started to leak out and affect my family. And so that's ultimately what brought me to Front Row Dads. I still remember my first retreat where I met Tucker Max, who's an awesome Front Row Dad. He and I have become good friends, and he's been a hugely beneficial guide for me along the way. And working through my anger. I remember when he first talked about it, I was like, "You're an idiot, dude." Like he's like, "Have you ever sat with your anger?" I'm like, "Shut up. What does that mean? Like sit with your anger? Like where do you feel it?" I'm like, "In my brain? I don't know. Who feels it? What do you mean feel it? I just want to explode, right?" And I didn't. And he's so evolved emotionally that I had like his questions were just going right past me. But to my credit and his credit, the patience we demonstrated to really find some of the answers that helped me, I am very proud of. And things are so much better now inside our family. It by no means perfect. I still have to check myself at times, but uh, my reactions, by and large, have been replaced with chosen responses. And so when I feel activated and my feelings, in our house, we talk about big feelings, right? The big feelings are the ones that we don't always aren't able to handle. And so when my feelings get too big, I can voice that to my children and say, I'm afraid I'm not going to handle these big feelings in a good way. I need a minute. And then I just separate. As
So
opposed to in the past, I would just either yell at them, right, to get them to go away so I could have a chance to
yeah.
uh, restore my regulation, or I would just walk away, almost abandoning them in a little micro way. And now I can just verbalize with them, here's where I'm at. And to your point, model for them what it looks like for a human being to
Yeah.
struggle with and find a way to regulate in a healthy way their big feelings. And so that's been the biggest challenge, and also the probably the biggest source, biggest point of improvement. And I guess I'll end by saying this: all of my attempts to, right, because I just described a relationship with my son, but it wasn't limited to my son. It was also with my wife,
Sure.
with my children, with my mom, with my sisters. Like I had relationship problems, and no matter what I did, when I tried to fix the problem in the relationship, it didn't end up working. Oftentimes it made it worse, or just,
Yeah.
the improvements weren't there. Ultimately, what I learned through Front Row Dads was that those external relationship problems were built upon a fractured relationship with myself.
Okay.
And when I turned my attention inward and restored the relationship that I had with myself, which involved healing trauma, acknowledging, things that I had suppressed and repressed and all that stuff. Once I turned the attention on myself and restored the relationship that I have with me, all of those other relationship problems started to improve.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me at all, right? Because you and I know very well that our external world is a reflection of our internal world, right? And I'm sure I'm borrowing that from some author or speaker I once heard, right? Who's a lot smarter than I am, but like it resonates, right? Like if we want things in our reality, our external world to change, it starts doing the inner work. And dude, to your, I want to publicly just acknowledge you, man, and give you your flowers, because you and I have been good friends for a number of years, and I've from afar, obviously, because you're in New York and I'm in Miami, right? But like you and I get together at least a couple times every year, and I just see the growth and all the inner work you've done. And I think I'm privy to, private one-on-one conversations where I've shared with you certain challenges that I have going on. And like you've reflected for me a lot of the work that you've done, man. So I want to honor you for going deep, man, because dude, it can be difficult. It can be difficult. It's not, at least for me, I don't want to project on others, but it hasn't always been the easiest to like look inward and also not judge and have these feelings of guilt and like beat yourself up over like, certain decisions you've made or how you've handled something. I mean, man, not I want to say maybe within the last 3 or 4 days, I responded to my daughter and raised my voice in a way that probably I'm not proud of, as I think
Mhm.
back now, right? And that's like a friend of mine says, like think of yourself as an orange, right? Or think of somebody else as an orange, and like when you squeeze an orange, Mike, like what comes out? Orange juice, right? Well, we are the orange, and like
Mm,
when we're squeezed, whatever's inside of us is what comes out, and it's like we're projecting on others. It's not
mhm,
necessarily about them, it's about what we have going on inside. So to your point, I think it's important that everybody just looks in the mirror, and as hard as it may be, they put forth the effort to put that work in,
mhm.
because our children need it, and quite honestly we need it. So well, dude, I want to pivot now to relationships and marriage. Let me start with You know what? I was going to start with a softball. I'm gonna dive right into the fast pitch. Conflict resolution, right? Uh, how do you and Melanie handle conflicts? Uh, how do you suggest men and women that are married or in a meaningful relationship, when conflict arises and we are triggered in some way, shape, or form, and everybody's got different triggers, like, how do you recommend and suggest handling that conflict, at least initially when it happens, and then growing uh, from that seed that was planted that has now caused these emotions inside of you? Like, how do we use conflict to better our relationships and to grow from those experiences?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will not pretend that we don't have conflict in our marriage. Melanie and
And
I certainly
neither
do.
will I.
What I will say, though, is that from my vantage point, I think that we handle it in a really healthy way. We are not a yelling family or couple. Sometimes with the kids we are, but she and I, for as long as we've been together, we've always been able to maintain a relatively even keel. And I know that's not true in many marriages. And I'm not judging one way as better than the other, but it's a level of volatility. I guess what I'm saying is that's a level of volatility that my advice probably isn't going to do much good on because I haven't been there. That said, it doesn't mean we don't experience conflict. And in many ways, sometimes that volatility is a great way to prevent things from getting tossed under the rug,
Yeah.
and left to simmer and fester in an unhealthy way. And so, all that to say, the probably the most important insight that Melanie and I realized. Well, there's two of them that I think I'll share. One is that our brains are meaning making machines,
Hmm.
right? And if we don't realize that, we can get swept away into this you said this, and when you said it I thought it meant this, so then I said this, and now we're counterattacking back and forth, right?
Yeah.
um, One example would be one time several years ago, I told Melanie I was really excited about having booked, I don't know, I think it was a 10-day trip down to Florida for us. And she said, quite innocently, "Oh, I was hoping for 12." And what she meant ultimately, when I zoom out and look at it without getting caught up in my ego, is that 12 days of sunshine in the middle of February from New York, it 12 days of sunshine down in Florida is better than 10. I can't argue with that. But
Yeah.
what I heard her say is, you're not a good enough provider because
Mm.
you only bought our family 10 days instead of 12. And it created conflict. As soon as I recognized and we had a conversation around what she meant and what I heard and how those were two different things, then the reconciliation came relatively quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully there's some value there. The other thing I'll say that has helped us work through conflict is trying to get under, like, the issue is never the issue, right? Like,
Right.
whatever that
Exactly.
had nothing to do with a vacation, right? The conflict that emerged had nothing to do with our travel. It had to do with my insecurity as a provider, and maybe to some extent how she relayed what she was feeling about the 10 verse 12 days, etc. So it's never the issue itself. So the better we are at pausing, taking a deep breath, saying, okay, and then being honest. When you said that, here's what I heard.
Yeah.
And Melanie knows if I use those exact words, or if she uses them with we both have this kind of mutual understanding that I'm not accusing you of saying anything wrong.
Hmm.
I heard your words and turned it into this. I'm taking ownership for that. And I want to have a conversation around, what did you really mean? Right. So that
Yeah. I love
maybe
that.
that, and so doing that, taking the time to pause and breathe and really communicate, I think is a key theme of what's emerging here. Um, the other side is to understand who the other person really is and what they value, right? And I'll just use this very brief example. I'm historically a very growth oriented guy, and I
Mhm.
still am. Now, I know because I've done a lot of the deep work that a lot of my growth orientation was unhealthy in the past, and some of it very healthy.
Mhm.
My wife is a very stability oriented person. So I value growth, she values stability. That's not new to us, but what was a hugely valuable insight was to come to the understanding that my value of growth is a direct threat to her value for stability. And her value for stability is a direct threat to my value for growth.
Interesting.
Now, we can play tug of war like many couples do for the rest of our life to try to figure out whose value is going to take priority. Or instead of playing tug of war and compromising on our own values for the rest of our life, we can come together as a team and collaborate. So if you envision, tug of war, people tugging in the opposite direction, we now tug in the same general direction, but my tug is toward the growth orientation of our future, and her tug is toward the stability orientation of our future. But at least we're pulling close to the same direction rather than fighting one another. And that has created a level of peace in our relationship that we didn't have before we recognize, right? This all comes down to awareness and recognizing the dynamic.
Yeah.
And so hopefully that's valuable.
Yeah, it's beyond valuable. I'm certain for those listening, because it resonates with me on so many levels. You talk about you and Melanie kind of like rowing in the same direction. Those weren't the words you used, but like that's the analogy that popped up in my head right now. Like, do you guys have a family meeting, right? Like I know in the past on the Front Row Dads podcast, I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, but the family boardroom meeting, and he introduced this
Jim Shields. Yep.
Jim Shields. Exactly. 18 Summers. I've had him on the podcast as well. Phenomenal book. I think it's called 18 Summers, right? And he has so much value to share. So definitely check out that Front Row Dads podcast, guys. But do you guys, use or leverage a family meeting, or do you have what is your vehicle in order to communicate that, hey, we have shared goals, while you might value stability and I might value growth, that's great, and we can still be rowing in the same direction? Like, how have you and Melanie and or maybe even with the kids, how have you guys communicated, like, here are our goals as a family, here's the things that are important to us, here are the things that we want to experience and do, and get on the same page, and then not just forget it. Like oftentimes we create goals or a vision and then it collects dust on our Google Drive, right? Or just a paper collect. But how do you make sure that it's a living, breathing thing that is not forgotten, and it's almost like your North Star as a family?
Yeah, it's a great question. And our process or strategy might be a little different than many. I love the idea of visions and having the intentionality behind, shared resources and that sort of thing. We actually have like our values are something that we've written down, and we have a very structured process as a family where we collaborate around these values. In fact, my son and I are going on a backpacking trip just later this week to celebrate his earning his first value patch. So we have 5 family values, 5 patches, and Melanie and I devised a curriculum that the kids can work through to earn their patches if they choose. It's not mandatory. And then when they get a patch, there's a rite of passage and a celebration. And that all originated out of Front Row Dads, a retreat I was at many years ago. That being said, when it comes to Melanie and I being on the same page, we actually do that pretty darn organically. We spend a lot of time together. We travel, I think I mentioned, 4 or 5 months out of the year. So she's in the passenger seat, I'm in the driver's seat, the kids are in the back. And that gives us a lot of time for us to talk through these types of things. How much are we traveling too much? Does our travel need to evolve in a way that would make it better for you? What did you think went well? What didn't you? So we have those opportunities. They tend to happen more organically. And I don't think it's better or worse per se than having quarterly board meetings and that sort of thing. We will at times, hey, if we go through a rough patch in the family where we had a period where all my kids just started to think it was awesome to tell other people in the family that they hated them, right? Like that just became a thing. Like that was how they expressed themselves, was I hate you. And, so we had to sit down, like we endured that. We tried to handle it, and then it wasn't working. And so we had to sit down as a family and we talked about what was going on and how we wanted to, course correct and that sort of thing. So it's not that we don't utilize them, but we kind of use them on an as needed basis. And the analogy I would equate this to is like, and I'm proud to say this, hopefully it doesn't come across as arrogant in any way. When somebody lives in a way that creates strength and flexibility and endurance in their body, they no longer need to go to the gym. Now, that's not me. I need to go to the gym on a regular basis, right?
Okay.
For somebody who that lives in a state of being as opposed to a state of doing, they don't need to set aside necessarily a meditation session every day because they're walking through their life in a meditative way. And so I think this is probably one, maybe the only area where our family has really embodied what it means to pursue a shared vision in such a way. We do it so organically that we don't necessarily need to carve out the board meetings.
Got it.
To plan. Now, that being said, we totally do Jim Shields' thing where each kid and mom and dad separately do a 4-hour board meeting each quarter, sometimes every 6 months if we're super busy. But so it's not to say that the thing isn't valuable to do. It's just that when it comes to Melanie and I sitting down and doing those planning sessions, we haven't found the need to do that.
Yeah, got it. No, and I think it's a fair point, man, is that, as with many things, it's not always a black and white type of solution, right? Just because something may work for Jim Shields and countless others who he's helped with that. You guys know your family, and that may or may not be necessary or needed. So, with anything you hear on this podcast or any other podcast or show or, event or whatever, it's like, sometimes it's important to be able to discern what needs to be tweaked and modified to apply to your particular family situation, your particular life. It's not always going to be a plug and play situation. And I think that's perfectly fine. So this feels, Mike, before as we're starting to kind of wind down here, this feels like a good opportunity to really encourage anybody listening to this podcast who's not a member of Front Row Dads. Like, if you've enjoyed some of the conversation here between myself and Mike, and you've gotten some value from it, this is like barely the tip of the iceberg of how deep we go at these retreats. Just a month and a half, 2 months ago, I was in the Florida Keys with a bunch of Front Row Dads. And Mike, I know that you weren't able to be at that one, brother. We missed you, but it's just incredible how you walk in like with an open mind, open heart, and then you come out just so much full of life and energy with this vigor to just want to be the best you can be, the best man, the best father, the best husband. Very little business talk, right? And that's not the reason for the community. So I want to encourage everybody, continue to plug into the Front Row Dads podcast. And if you guys head over to frontrowdads.com, you can learn more about this incredible community that clearly has influenced both Mike and I over the last couple of years, at least for myself. So Mike, I want to kind of transition and ask you a few questions about health and wellness, maybe even a mental health question. As far as routines that have had a profound impact on your life, and this can be on your physical health or this can be on your mental health. Is there anything that you do on a daily, weekly basis that you would attribute to, man, this has been a game changer in my life and has allowed me to show up as the best version of myself?
Yeah, dude, there's countless things that I could point to right here. I am a guy who I can take even the most healthiest of things, self-care, daily routine, morning routine, and make it punitive, militaristic, and unhealthy pretty quickly. I've done that.
All right.
There was a time a couple of years ago where I had 17 cornerstone habits, right? And it started as a miracle morning, a la our good friend Hal Elrod. And then it morphed into a supersized version of that if I didn't do it X number of days a week, I was a piece of shit, right? Like, and it got ugly quick. Now that's not to say I still have a morning routine. I love Hal's work. I just had to check my relationship to it, as has kind of emerged as a theme here on this call. I took something very healthy and my relationship to it got unhealthy. That said, if I'm going to tell you the things that I do in service of my wellness, it's heat exposure, cold plunge or cold shower, exercise, in some form or fashion. It used to have to look a very certain way for it to count. There was a time where I was addicted to marathons and triathlons, so anything under 10 miles on my feet was considered a failure, right? That's not the case
Wow.
anymore.
Yeah.
But I was exercising 20, 25 hours a week in a very unhealthy way. But now maybe it's some stretching, maybe it's some resting, like literally lying down on a yoga mat outside in the grass and just resting with a little bit of stretching. Sometimes it's some strength work, calisthenics, get the burpees in, right? Like, but what I do, I think the healthiest thing I do for myself is on a daily basis, I ask myself, what do I need right now to feel my best? And sometimes that's a 3-hour hike in the woods. Sometimes it's lifting weights. Sometimes it's stretching, as I said. But I think what I'm suggesting is the most beneficial change that I've experienced over the last couple of years when it comes to my wellness is letting go of the rigidity with which I approached it. I've done all sorts of silly things, 1,000 push-ups in an hour, like as a pet project to somehow prove my worth. Now, it made me strong, and I got I looked as good with my shirt off as I ever have.
Yeah.
I also tore my elbows apart, right? So it was healthy in some ways and very unhealthy in others. And so now I'm trying to take a more holistic view of wellness, not just physical wellness. So there's the strength, flexibility, agility, endurance, all of these things. But I used to silo even the physical wellness from the mental wellness, from the spiritual wellness. And now I'm zooming out even further and kind of wrapping those three realms, each of which have their own components, together and trying to treat my whole self. And that's where the meditation comes in, and the prayer, and the, reading of the Bible, and all of these different things that I found very beneficial. But I'm doing them in a way, like I said, that emerges out of the single question, which is, what do I need from myself today to be at my best?
Bro, I love that in so many ways, because just Saturday morning, I did a yoga class, and the yoga instructor, it's guided. She's giving you direction as to what, upward dog, downward dog, like all these different things that she is taking us through. And at one point she goes, listen to your body. If you want to do something else, because this was hot flow vinyasa yoga. And so it's a flow, and we put it together. And so, and she just gives you the freedom to be like, listen to your body, do whatever movement feels right. And that's what came up for me as you were talking, is that if there's something I want those listening to this podcast get, is ask yourself, do you have a very rigid workout regimen or anything that you do from a physical and or mental health perspective? And does that serve you? And if it does serve you, does it serve you at the highest level for you? Because my invitation to people listening is to loosen some of the reins. It might actually unlock something else that you didn't know was possible. It may not, but it might, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so unless you're aware and you ask the question, and I like the fact that now I've joined the gym here, Lifetime, where like I do a variety of classes. In the past, I used to maybe not be thrilled to get into the gym because I was tired of doing the same types of exercises, working on the same muscle groups. The variety has, I think, really worked for me. So back to the whole black and white conversation, you got to kind of just figure out what works for you, right? But I don't think anybody here is going to argue against the fact that exercise needs to be just a pillar in your life, especially if you want to be an intentional father and husband. Like, you need to be here, God willing, in the future. And part of that is doing your part to take care of your health, while understanding that the next minute isn't promised to us. And obviously there's things outside of our control, of course. So Mike, man, one, maybe two more questions if I can squeeze it in here, man. Really just, dude, love talking to you, man, privately and now, publicly. So this has been awesome. I got to sneak in a business question here, but I'm going to tie it to the personal. What are some lessons that you've learned from business that you've applied to parenting, that you've applied to your relationship with Melanie, and or maybe vice versa? Maybe some things that you've applied on the personal side, or that you've learned on the personal side that you've applied to your business to help grow it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the question. I believe that all good business principles are good life principles, and vice versa. One that what jumps to mind, I actually can't take credit for it. I'm stealing it from Tucker Max, but in business, we talk about the minimum viable product and delivering it to the minimum viable audience, right? And sometimes we need to play with the idea of a minimum viable separation. Like, if our house is not healthy, maybe I need to spend some time away from the kids for 3 days, 5 days. Maybe it's a Front Row Dads retreat. Maybe it's a vision quest or something, right? But to remind myself what is most important and what's getting in the way of connection between my wife and kids. And oftentimes it's disconnection within myself. And so I need to separate myself from it. Now, this sounds a little morbid, but I think it's valid. Like, I think a lot of marriages end in divorce because people don't confront the issues that are there. They're afraid to confront what might be there. So they never test a minimum viable separation. Whereas if they just figured out, hey, let's spend a little time apart, do our own work, sort through the angst inside of me, you sort through the angst inside of you, and then we'll come back together and see what happens, right? Whether that's, again, in any relationship, I think it's valuable, but people avoid and ignore and put their head in the sand for so long that they never end up that by the time they have to do something about it, there's too big a mess and you can't fix it. The same is true for many businesses, right? When we put our business, myself in particular, when I used to go to launch a new business, it was like, wanted to over engineer it and make it really cute and package it and make it perfect and then put it out there. Well, anybody who's had any success in business knows that, like, the faster you fail, as long as you're moving forward, the faster you're going to find your success. And so instead of engineering the whole company top to bottom, just start with the minimum viable product and don't wait till you have 1,000 or 1 million followers on Facebook to put it out there. You put it out to the minimum viable audience and let it go. So that's a concept that I found really valuable, is knowing that lots of small steps are going to get you further, faster, and to the end healthier, and in air quotes, of course, healthier than waiting to take one giant leap that's going to solve all your problems.
Yeah, you're speaking my language, dude. So good in so many levels. Mike, man, just I appreciate you, bro, in so many ways, man. You've had a big impact on my life, and again, I don't think it's surprising to me that when I was asked if I wanted to participate on this Front Row Dads member podcast takeover series, you were the first person that came to mind, man. Our conversations are so effortless. I feel like I always walk away as a better version of myself, or at the very minimum, with just more awareness about certain things. And sometimes it's just the questions we ask ourselves can lead us down a particular path. So I'm grateful for you for introducing me to the Front Row Dads community. Grateful for John Vroman and his leadership. The culture that he and the team have created at Front Row Dads is nothing short of spectacular and inspiring in many ways. And just a lot of you've mentioned some of the members: Tucker Max, Hal Elrod. We didn't even talk about Dr. Kelly Flanagan, who I know you're a big fan of his. And I had the opportunity at my first retreat in Park City to have dinner with him and a few other of the members. And damn, man, just a lot of wisdom, man. Just a lot of wisdom. In fact, I want to say that John interviewed Dr. Kelly on a recent Front Row Dads podcast. So definitely check that out. Maybe the team will include it in the show notes. But just so many resources, so many incredible people. If you have the opportunity to be around these men, do it, because you can only improve as a man, father, and husband. And with that being said, man, I want to kind of give you the last word. Anything you might want to share with the audience, whatever that might be, or we can just wrap, because we're coming up right at about an hour here.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I would say, I don't know how I got going 60 minutes without talking about Dr. Kelly, because he is a critical component of the growth and healing that I've experienced over the last couple of years. I actually just got to spend 2 days with him out in Chicago. Our families hung out for 2 days. He brought us into our house. It was such a blessing. And I think that's a microcosm of the macro here. And my experience in Front Row Dads, literally some of my best friends and not some of, but my best friends on this planet, the deepest friendships I currently have are with members in the Front Row Dads community. I just came back, as I said, from Colorado. Chris Emick and Ali, JV was obviously there, along with, I don't know, 12, 13 other guys. 16 of us spent time in the woods that I'd pay $1 million for, man. It was that good. And the friendships that have emerged and the truly deep relationships out of my participation in Front Row Dads. And it's not like you sign up and it just happens. You've got to engage and invest the time and energy into nurturing these relationships. But it is the thing that makes me a Front Row Dad lifer, beyond a shadow of a doubt, or the people that I meet within the community.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love it. And I'm so bummed. Ali invited me to participate and I just couldn't make the dates work. So I so look forward to the next adventure because I will be there with you, brother, hopefully, God willing. So guys, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap this Front Row Dads podcast episode. Make sure that you are subscribed so that you're notified when new shows come out. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. You've gotten value. One of the biggest gifts I think you can give somebody hosting a podcast is an honest review. Sharing the episode with somebody who you think might benefit from the conversation is a big gift. And so if you're so inclined to do that, we'd be extremely grateful. And if not, just continue to show up, plug in, do the work, and just take one thing that maybe you heard from my conversation with Mike here and ask yourself how you might be able to apply that to your life today. Maybe if it's just a micro step, because I think like Mike said, it's the micro actions that are going to ultimately lead to the macro results. It doesn't happen overnight. Oftentimes it's not a light switch, but if we're willing to look inwardly, do the work, take accountability and responsibility, we can create a massive, massive and profound impact on not just our families, our communities, but as cliche and corny as it might sound to some, the world. I really believe that. So guys, with that being said, we're going to wrap this Front Row Dads podcast. I'm so grateful and appreciative to the team for allowing me to take over just one show. And Mike, to you, man, for the friendship, for the wisdom, and for just being so open-hearted, dude. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. We'll see you soon.
All right, guys. You have a great one. We'll talk soon.